I personally am very excited about this one. I have used the FOIA process, the Freedom of Information Act process myself for at a number of agencies, and it's always very interesting to see what you get. And so I really appreciate that that John Barnes has utilized that and done some great work with his results. He is an investigative reporter who has led projects for the largest and most read newspaper in his home state of Michigan, mlive.com. John's efforts have exposed state and federal wealth management failings, highlighted juvenile-lifer injustices, uncovered predatory government lending that bankrupted family farms, and provoked a state crackdown after exposing widespread indifference and non-compliance with mandatory school safety drills, including against arms intruders. We also really appreciate that John is calling in while he's out in nature. He went to the local library to utilize their Wi-Fi. So appreciate the extra effort you made in attending our conference. So take it away, John.
Thank you for having me. I'm John Barnes, and I am coming in from beautiful northern Michigan. We don't even have internet at our family farmhouse up here. I'm from downstate in Michigan. I've been a reporter for 40 years, and I worked at the largest newspapers in Michigan that were not the Detroit newspapers. And then now I work for the Detroit News quite a bit. They publish a lot of my stories about wolves. And I got into wolf research and reporting about 10 years ago. I was an investigative editor at a third largest newspaper in Michigan, and a group of other newspapers that were part of our chain. And in doing some stories about wolves, we found that there was a lot of interest in that topic, and I could see it in the engagement, in the readership numbers, and in just a lot of the energy that came together behind those stories. So aside from finding it a great topic, I'm also very interested in poorly operated government. And I think this has given me an opportunity to look at both of those issues. So I'm going to show you a slideshow today about a single farm in Michigan that has had more depredation than any other farm, that has had more wolves shot at it than any other farm in Michigan, and that has probably the most resilient pack of wolves in Michigan because they've been shot at so many times and they survive and they continue. The reason that goes on is there's some shocking reasons, and I think we'll go through this and I'll tell you about 2 times that wolves have been shot at this farm. One was in 2016, that wasn't found out till 2018. And the other was last summer, and that wasn't discovered until this June. This last January. So we'll walk through both of those, and then I'll show you a little bit about the next story that I'm working on. So give me a moment to put in the slideshow. And I have my daughter. I want you to see my daughter. This is Katie Barnes. She is a director of the Crisis and Reputation at a very large public relations firm in Michigan. And so I start the fires and she puts them out. And that's not joke. So it's going to have some of the technical parts. And then we'll take it from there. So here we go. We're starting with Moraine Park Farms, and Moraine Park Farms has Michigan craft beef, a unique beef that they say they produce that tastes better than others. And they're operated in the western part of our Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They feed their farm, their cattle, a mix, they say, of supplemental feeding of cherries and apples and old beer barley grains and that sort of thing. And that's why they call it Michigan craft beef. And that's why they have cherries on their logo. Moraine Park Farms has about 2,000 acres. I believe it is the largest cattle farm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They have about 700 black Angus cows and calves. That makes about 300 cows, 300 calves at a time, and about 100 cows that maybe didn't get pregnant in the spring, and they'll try again in the fall. You'll see there where the calving ranch is located way up in the left-hand corner, and that's about 500 miles away from downstate, where Moraine Park Farms is located near Grand Rapids, Michigan. I happen to live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. You'll see Traverse City, Michigan, about 150 miles north there. And I'm on that little tiny peninsula sticking out in a bay just above the Huron-Manistee National Forest. That's where I am right now. 1 mile to my left, 1 mile to my right. There are the two arms of Lake Michigan. They're awesome. We have wolves, 700 of them in our UP. They've been growing since 1989. We're part of the Great Lakes segment of wolves, and Wisconsin has more, and Minnesota has even more than that. Together, we have about 70% of the wolves in the lower 48 states. 1 moment. We have to get this working again. It looks like it stopped on me. Okay, I'm sorry about that. And farm, in 2016, there were 35 animals that were killed or missing. That's about half in the last 10 years of all these lost. And the Dykstras, it's owned by father and son, Tom and Terry Dykstra, and they have the Upper Peninsula Farm and the Lower Peninsula Farm. They've received money every year for the last 10 years for cattle that have been killed or gone missing. Michigan is unique. Most states, well, I'll talk about the Midwest. Michigan pays for lost cows. And that means that if a farmer has ever had a wolf depredation in the past, ever, they can claim any missing cow anytime it happens. That means if the cow disappears, it's presumed a wolf killed it. It doesn't take into account that that cow might have died naturally and been dragged off, or a lot of other scenarios that does not mean a wolf was involved. But that's the law in Michigan. It is not the law in Minnesota. And I believe in Wisconsin, they will pay for lost animals, but only after 2.5% of their herd has been lost naturally. You don't get paid for a missing cow until you've lost 2.5% of your herd naturally. In Wisconsin. So total in the last 10 years, Moraine Park Farms has lost 85 cows. They've been paid $58,000, more than that. And that is the most of any farm in Michigan by half. So in 2016, there was a very disturbing incident at that farm. And you'll read the memo here that it says, this was a memo written to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service by the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Katie, will you mark me at 15 minutes? At maybe straight up 3 or 3:05. And it reads, excuse me, in one case, the wolf was sufficiently bold as to enter the pasture and kill a calf at the very moment one of our wildlife technicians was in the same field investigating a previous kill. Pretty scary. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service found that astonishing as well, and it said it is clear that the wolves are acting aggressively, including in the presence of humans, as documented by the attack on livestock while the technician was in the same field. These are hard to look at. This is proof of the depredation occurring on that farm. These are victims. This was another depredation that year on that farm. And these are victims. That was one of 3 wolves shot by the landowner, shot by the USDA Wildlife Services at the request of the Michigan DNR because of that terrible incident. Another victim, 3 total. And I want to make a point that the endangered species was in effect at this time, except in 2012 to 2014, it was lifted and wolves were not protected. And it was in this period that landowner permits, I'm backing up. They were protected at this time, period. I'm going to talk about another instance. But the USDA used a loophole that said the wolf was killed not because it was in danger of killing another human, which is a circumstance in which they can be killed, but the wolf was killed because of demonstrable, not immediate, threat to human safety. Someday down the road, they could be a threat to human safety. So I found out 2 years later, through a tip, that some wolves had died there. And it took me a significant period of time to get some answers from the Department of Natural Resources because they weren't interested in talking about this case. Ultimately, I had to file probably half a dozen FOIAs for this one. We saw emails, we saw depredation records, we saw necropsies. In the depredation records, we saw an interesting item. On the date that that terrible incident happened in the field by the DNR worker, this is what the actual report read. It said that the DNR worker has stopped at the farm to give him some batteries for his flashes that he uses in the field. And when he returned with the flashlights, somebody had seen a wolf in the field, and he had to drive there and shoot a gun in the air, and the wolf ran away. That was the incident that became a wolf attacking a calf near a DNR worker already investigating another depredation. This doesn't fit. As we did more investigating, we found out that a powerful state senator who heads up the Natural Resources Committee had pressured the DNR to take care of the wolves for his constituent. He actually said, quote, the question became, who is going to go first? Who wants to take the first shot, so to speak? I think he, the UP wildlife chief, understood someone had to go first. This was not an incident of a wolf tearing a calf apart near a guy who was doing his job. It's never happened. So, give you a little look at Moraine Park's food, their steak, hamburger, all with this impressive feeding. And we also collected every payment to every farmer for every livestock he lost. And we looked at Tom Dykstra's claims over time. And that's how we identified that he was, in fact, far and away had more depredation than any other farm. As Rachel said, she likes FOIAs. And in this case, as we were seeking records, it's a little bit like Forrest Gump. Life is like a box of chocolates, and so are FOIAs. And what we found out was a letter that I wasn't seeking, but it turned up in the grab bag of stuff, was that 5 workers at the Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Laboratory had become infected with tuberculosis from testing deer for chronic wasting disease. Take a look at that picture and see if you can figure out why that worker might have been contaminated with tuberculosis. The state never told anybody about that. Dana Nessel, our Attorney General, saw something she didn't like about the state's handling of those FOIA requests. She did an investigation briefly. She ended it without stating what she found. I later found out that some personnel in the DNR had been let go and during my reporting. And it's possible she was told about that, and that satisfied her interest. And so 2 years went by, a little more, 3 years went by, and suddenly that's very obscure. So that's one, excuse me, that is one set of shootings at Moraine Park Farms. The second set started last summer. Federal report in January came out. And without naming the farm, it said that they had been doing non-lethal work at farms in a number of states, and that it went well in Michigan, except at one farm where they ended up shooting 8 wolves because the non-lethal work did not work. 8 wolves. Remember, this farm has more wolves shot than any others, and I'm talking about even before the cases that we're talking about. So we wrote a story about this ranch we found out about through this very obscure federal report that didn't name the ranch, and obtained the name of the ranch, and we published in March a story that talked about why these wolves were killed. And the report gives us some clues. But in trying to figure it out, we requested livestock producer control permits. A designated shooter is named by a landowner. In this case, the landowner named 7 designated shooters. 3 of them were from his hometown back home. It was the folks he knew. A number of others were local predator hunters in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That's one of the wolves they took. That might be the alpha male. He was shot at night, got away. They couldn't find him. They found him a day later, maybe about a day later, but he already had been scavenged on by birds. Eggs had already, from flies, were already in his everywhere. And we saw another necropsy report that explained something that the report gave us a clue about. The first wolf shot was the alpha female. This report will tell you at the bottom, there's still a small amount of milk in her teats. Researchers will tell you that if you shoot the alpha female first, you risk disrupting the pack's ability to hunt. Research has shown that, and I decided that we needed to see what was happening on that farm. So we requested photographs from the trail cameras. They weren't in the federal report. There were no photographs of that farm, except radios playing music at night and that sort of things, non-lethal tactics. And then we started getting images. We got them back, and that's a beautiful gray wolf. If you look in the woods behind it, you're going to see a couple of cows. Amazing photograph. And you'll see another wolf. I like that picture. Take a look at the date below, please. September 24th, 2021, because that becomes important. Time, Kate? This is just, I just like this picture too. This shows the river that runs past the farm. This is perfect wolf territory. It's got beaver dams and ponds beyond it. It is wolf country. And we have 3 wolves here on a field, his pasture. What do you think they're doing on that disturbed ground? Or this wolf in that hole, looking like a carnivorous groundhog. Or this wolf. Or this wolf. Or that. Let's look at that for a moment. This is a wolf in broad daylight with cows in the background, digging up poorly buried remains of cattle. And the federal report found that there were so many poorly buried cattle that the wolves in this area had learned to eat that cattle. When the alpha female was shot, and then possibly the alpha male a week later, the pack couldn't hunt effectively. So what did it do? It turned to the livestock. And how many years has that been going on? That's the focus of the next story that I'm working on. I would suspect that the questions are gonna, and I already know some of the questions, but I can't tell them here. But if you want to find out, I put my email up there. I'm on Twitter. I will usually announce the stories when they come out. And I hope soon to have a story to put out there and tell you what actually happened on that farm. We put out a dozen FOIAs, probably more than that. Many of them were at the Agriculture Department, have been having trouble. They withheld records in one request. They withheld records that prove the depredation has begun again this year. And if you remember that little wolf that was in that field on 9/24, that was well after the last of the 8 wolves was shot. By about 2 weeks, I should say, actually. 2 weeks after. They didn't get the whole pack. And the depredation has begun again this spring. And that's my story. Thanks for listening to me. I'll take any questions that anybody has. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, John. So it sounds like, they were not, that farm in question was basically luring those wolves in with the poorly disposed of carcasses.
That's what the allegation is. The problem in Michigan is that the law that covers carcass burials on farms was written before wolves even returned to the state. So all you have to do on a farm is bury your animal 2 feet deep. All the regulations about how many you can put in an acre and things like that. But the one of the people, the Federal Wildlife Services workers who put those trail cameras up, he told me that and he moved them around. They weren't always in the same exact spot. So when you're saying, why don't I see a lot more of these wolves every single day? There were wolves in that property almost every day. The trail cameras showed they weren't always in the same place. So we see 2 distinct sections before the shootings where there was scavenging, and I found 2 distinct sections after the shooting where you can see scavenging and an indication that these wolves have survived. The law I was talking about needs to be revisited. It's not effective. And when the DNR says they're following the law, that's true. There's much more they could have done, but they have ground to stand on at that. So that's the next thing to look at in Michigan.
So we did have a question about I guess if it pertains to Michigan law, is that so if a farm shoots the wolves, are they then that's fine? They can still get compensated in Michigan?
Yes. There's the two ways they shoot the wolf. They shot them by declaring them a future danger, which was ludicrous, and they shoot them during periods of congressional, or usually government action that makes the wolves not protected anymore. And they can shoot the wolves then if the DNR allows them to. Got to be permission. And the law in Michigan says you do not get a permit if you have poorly buried animals. You cannot shoot wolves on your property because you're attracting them. Again, poorly buried according to who?
Good question.
The animals are turned over to the DNR. They use the skulls for kids' classes. They show them around. They do things like that. So they couldn't use one of the skulls because they shot the animal twice. It didn't die. And so they had to execute it at close range. And that skull was not usable.
It's horrible. We do have a question just about the FOIA process. If someone didn't know how to get started, how do you know where to start when requesting a FOIA? Do you have recommendations for folks that are interested in submitting Freedom of Information Act requests?
Yes, you'll probably be able to do it a lot easier than me. Michigan has the worst record for open records, all 50 states. The Center for Integrity had rated all 50 states. And so it's very difficult if you don't really know what to do to get the answers you really want. Hopefully it's not as hard in other states. I would contact the department that you want information from. They only have to search their own departments or even their own division. So make sure if you're talking about wolves, you're getting the wildlife division, not just the Department of Natural Resources. You'll get guided there sooner or later. A lot of these are good people. And that's the best way to start. Study what everybody else has done. See what's out there as far as what you might be able to get. Learn what the records are. It's critical. If you don't know what the records are, if you don't know what you're asking for, you get led around by the nose.
I have learned from some of my FOIA requests that it's important to ask for attachments.
Oh, of course, yes, and some in Michigan they strip the attachments sometimes. It's really all over the place. Some department. I was charged several $100s for records from the Department of Natural Resources, redacted, names out, and it costs $0 with the names from the Department of Agriculture. There's no rhyme or reason to that. They have different rules they're going by. Same state government, tough in Michigan.
Washington is a little bit friendlier, but you're right. It's a different experience depending on which department you're asking questions from. And I have learned the more specific I can be, the better results I will get in a time period. But yes, it's not as intimidating as I initially thought, just like
right.
Trying to see what you can get from. Okay.
And don't be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to the FOIA coordinator, even in advance. Tell them this is what I want, and get their advice on how to get what you want. And most of these people, when I'm doing it, they're trying to cover something up. They know what I'm asking about, and they know who I am. When you ask for it, you're not coming with any baggage necessarily, or some of the other people who are on this podcast. And these people are inclined to help. They want to show where it is. Lots of times, and when you get a little deeper into the divisions and after you write a few stories, it changes a little bit.
Would you say it's like, if for people that are not journalists, would you say it's helpful for people to reach out to other journalists and present the information they may have gotten from a FOIA to potentially interested in journalists to help, entice them into have interest?
Sure. Most journalists I know, even though they tend to be very busy, love feedback from readers. So if you sent them a note and told them that you enjoyed an article they did, and be sincere, follow reporters, email them, tell them they did a good job, you're interested in their work. You don't even have to ask for anything the first time. Just start following them. And then when you figure out this is the person, say, may I talk to you? I think you'll be surprised.
Thank you.
My brilliant daughter tells me also, make sure it's the right beat. That you're not trying to get somebody to do something that is they write about food, but not about wolves, you know. So, you know, don't get any reporter.
Yes, that makes sense. Okay. Let's see if there's any other questions here. There's one more question here. How can we get more investigative journalists to do stories about wildlife agencies and wildlife services if we find things similar to your story? She said, the questioner says it seems very commonplace in all the wolf states.
Yeah, there's a lot of these stories that seem to repeat themselves. And I recently talked to Carter Niemeyer, and if you folks know Carter, and I've seen some recognition, he is a former federal wildlife trapper. He was a wolfer. He wrote a book about his experiences. He's turned through 180 degrees, and now he is all about non-lethal management, about the abuses that the government uses. And he is an exciting guy. But the importance of power, if I remember your question correctly, is merely to go. Can you ask that part again, please, one more time?
They're wondering how they can get more journalists to do these stories about wildlife and the wildlife services.
It's to make them aware, like Carter Niemeyer, of what you're seeing. Again, pick that person who you think is interested and pitch it to them. A long time ago, 10 years ago, I reached out to Nancy Warren, who is the executive director of Wolf Watchers, and she lives here in Michigan. And Nancy is a superb gadfly. She keeps an eye, she's a volunteer, she keeps an eye on the government, and she is always right. When I talk to Nancy and she tells me something, or other sources that I trust, I value them telling me the right thing because I always check it out. And if they're good and they're accurate, then they're useful in telling the public about what's going on. Nancy has done a terrific job of that in 10 years.
Good, thank you. All right, well, unless there's other questions, I think we can wrap it up. And I really appreciate your time and taking time out of your vacation to join us in the conference and present your information.
Thanks, everybody. Visit Traverse City. Come to Michigan.
And thanks to your daughter, too, for her help.
Absolutely.
On IT.
Yes. We can all use that.
Good luck with your conference.